Hi, if you're new here, welcome. This is going to be a bit of a departure to my usual format. I'm going to be responding to some of the comments which I received on my previous video because I seem to have touched a nerve, and I think it's very important to really dig in a little deeper into this topic. But before we get into that, I just do want to reassure my regular viewers that I still do live in Germany. I haven't left. There seems to be a bit of confusion, and because of the title of the video, which was not intentional. I'm currently working on an article about the war on complexity in relation to the crisis of meaning in the modern age. And maybe I came out with this ambiguous title because of that. If you're interested in reading that when it comes out, please do sign up to my newsletter. The link is down below. You'll get a notification when that comes out. But I love living in Germany. I have no intention of leaving here anytime soon. I'm originally from the UK. I've lived and worked here now for over a decade. And the last video I made got a lot of pushback and seemed to touch a nerve. After reading like the 50th comment, which was like, I can't believe you're telling people not to learn German. How disrespectful. That is outrageous. Why don't you just go home if you don't want to learn German? I really thought it was very important to, give a bit of context because I think that is why this point has been misunderstood. Okay, so at least in my estimation, there is a big difference between should and need. And the point of contention was that I said you don't need to learn German anymore. I actually said that you should learn German, actually several times, but the commenters just started to ignore this so they could indulge in their righteous indignation. I mean, who would have thought that language learning would be so controversial, right? So what exactly did I mean by this? Why would I say this? Übrigens, ganz kurz, bevor wir jetzt weitermachen. Ich habe, für die es noch nicht wissen, ich habe 2 bis 3 Videos auf diesem Kanal, die nur auf Deutsch sind. Das mache ich jetzt nicht mehr, weil es einfach keinen Sinn macht. Und nicht nur das, mein Alltag ist auf Deutsch. Mein komplettes Arbeitsleben ist in deutscher Sprache und die Sprache meines Freundeskreis ist nur Deutsch. And that's one of the reasons why I actually started this channel in English, because I had the feeling that my English was getting a little bit rusty and I wanted to prevent that. But anyway, the reason I said that you don't need to learn German anymore is that I was making an observation. I was making a cultural comparison between now and 13, 14 years ago, the time when I actually moved here. But, I have taken on board what some of you said, and maybe a more accurate statement would have been that German is not enough to live in Germany. You need at least English, and if you really want to thrive here, Arabic or Turkish would also be a good idea. But anyway, before we continue, I really want to make this clear that I was only talking about the major cities in Germany. And so if you are living in the countryside, if you're living in a small town or even a medium-sized town, a lot of what I'm going to get into here is not going to apply to you, and you are probably going to struggle to understand what I'm trying to convey. But bear with me, I'm going to do my best. I do understand this because I grew up in the English countryside. My parents still live in the house in which I grew up in, and when I make videos about the UK, I often get a lot of comments from people complaining that the country's completely changed. London is unrecognizable. It's Londonistan. Immigrants running rampant everywhere. And I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, nothing's changed. The countryside hasn't changed. Everything's exactly the same as it was when I grew up there. And so, the difference between country and city living is huge. It's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And not only that, the difference between different cities is also quite significant. And I actually wrote another article about this last week because I was in Munich a couple of weeks ago, and I really, was very aware of how culturally different Munich is to Frankfurt am Main, the city where I live. So I am not sure from reading through the comments that many people are actually aware of what a lot of the major cities in Germany actually look and feel like today. So, like I said, if you are living in the countryside, if you're coming from another country and you are expecting a traditional German experience, you might be quite surprised. So what exactly am I getting at here? Well, I think that for Germans living in the countryside or a small town, or also for international visitors coming from another country, if you were to visit, say, for example, Frankfurt am Main, the city where I live, you would most probably feel that you have left Germany and that you have entered a foreign country. The architecture, the food, the people, the language, like all of this is quite foreign if you are expecting a traditional German experience. Now, obviously, it's not the whole city. There are certain areas that are much more German than others, but generally a lot of the central inner city districts of Frankfurt are what I would say not particularly German. This is just the reality of the situation, and please don't misunderstand me. I'm not judging it. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying that is what it is like. Now, this is actually not that new. Frankfurt am Main has always been a very diverse and multicultural city. There's always been people from all over the world living here. Some of you mentioned that I am living maybe in a bubble, that it's just me and, a sort of expat community, and I don't really realize what the rest of Germany is like, which could be, a valid criticism, but this is not just me, sharing my own personal experience. I mean, just look back to 2009 when Westerwelle, a German politician, blew up in a BBC reporter's face because the BBC reporter asked him questions in English and he was like, "Das ist Deutschland hier. In Deutschland reden wir natürlich Deutsch." But no, I mean, that's not obvious. Today, you will not find that kind of sentiment here anymore. German politicians have repositioned themselves to appeal to a more international audience, and you will find them now speaking English a lot more often in public, something which the Merkel government was very reluctant to do. In February of 2023, the FDP party floated the idea of making English an official second language in Germany. Now, this is obviously more a legal issue than it is a cultural one. It's mainly just because at the moment, German is the only official language in Germany, and so it means anything to do with government offices and bureaucracy has to be done in German. And so if you don't speak German, you have to provide a translation, or you have to come with an interpreter. Otherwise, it's not legally binding. And so, yes, while that is really just a legal issue, and maybe not a cultural one, really the whole idea of this is to make it easier for immigrants to come into the country and to get set up. Because, obviously, the vast majority of immigrants coming here are more likely to speak English than they are to speak German. And by the way, just a brief note on immigration while we are on the topic, it might surprise you that the majority of immigrants do not move because they like the language or the culture of the host country. Immigration is economics, that's it. It's that simple. If the host country has a very good economy, there's hope and opportunities, that is why people move there. And so, the whole idea of integration and learning the language, that comes later, but that is maybe 0.1% of people come with that goal in mind. If I'm honest, that was not my goal either. I could not speak a word of German before moving here, and I didn't really know anything about the country. And learning a language as an adult is one of the most cognitively challenging things you can do. I really could feel my brain breaking. It actually felt like there was resistance, the neural pathways in my brain were resisting this change that I was forcing on it. And the first 6 months were not fun. It was very uncomfortable. And I think the majority of Germans learn English over the period of 20 years. Now, try condensing that down into 1 year or, maybe 2. But it is very intense. And if there is another option, humanity always chooses the path of least resistance. That's just baked into our evolution. And so if there is another option where you don't have to, subject yourself to this cognitive hell, why would you do it? So I mentioned in the previous video that this is something I've noticed in the last 2 to 3 years, but that, it's not really that new. I mean, I've noticed a sort of snowballing effect. I've noticed an increase of this, but this has been sort of ratcheting up for many, many years. And even in 2017, the then health minister Jens Spahn was quite vocal in sharing his frustrations that the staff of many restaurants and bars and retail stores, they do not speak German. And so if you only speak German, it's going to be very difficult for you to get by in Berlin. You have to be able to speak English as well. And since 2017, things have developed quite significantly. The government is really bending over backwards to try and help immigrants get set up here. They are trying to change the laws. They're bringing in new services, new programs and incentives And this is just a statement of the reality. I'm not saying this is good or bad, it's just what it is. And so what I mean when I say you don't need to learn German if you are living in a major city is that you can have a thriving social life without it. You can get a great job without it, although yes, it will be easier if you speak German. But just bear in mind, I'm speaking to my younger self here because that's all I can do. There are many people that who move to Germany with work contracts where German just doesn't even come into the mix. I'm talking about air traffic controllers. I'm talking about finance, about IT, about tech, about things like graphic design, web design, remote positions. Like there are just a lot of industries where you do not need to speak German. Obviously, there are a lot of industries where you do need to speak German. But even in industries like retail and hospitality, like employers are just taking whatever they can get. And at the moment, that is people who don't necessarily speak German. If you don't speak English, you will be at a major disadvantage in the main cities in Germany. And so, like I said at the beginning, maybe a more accurate statement would have been to say that the German language is important if you're moving here, but it will not suffice. In fact, the only instance where you do really need to speak German is if you want to get German citizenship. At the moment, you still have to pass a German exam in order to get it. But as I said, the government is constantly changing and updating the immigration law and blah, blah, blah. I feel like I could talk about this for hours on end. I'm not discounting the benefits of learning a foreign language. Your life will be infinitely better if you do learn it. What I'm trying to get across is that it is becoming easier and easier to just not speak German. That's partly because of government policies. It's partly just because of the sheer number of immigrants. It's also partly because of new developments in tech. I can now open a bank account online in 30 minutes. I couldn't do that 13 years ago. Streaming services, translation apps, ChatGPT, the list goes on. Now, I want to be very clear. I am somebody who enjoys living in multicultural and diverse environments. Otherwise I would have left Frankfurt am Main a very long time ago. But that is the reason why I lived for 2 years in China and lived for a year in Australia and spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. I feel very comfortable in these environments, and my initial response when I hear a foreign language is curiosity. I just enjoy listening and observing people, observing their body language, how they interact, how different people do things differently. But I do not subscribe to the mantra of diversity is our greatest strength, maybe diversity of thought, maybe to a certain extent diversity of belief, but you do have to share certain basic values, otherwise it's not going to work. And so I can understand that if you're not used to living in these multicultural environments, it might scare you or shock you. But I have to say that up until making this video, I was not aware that there was much resistance regarding this whole language issue. I made a video last year about the potential plans to bring English as a second official language into Germany. And the comments on that video were overwhelmingly positive. People seem to be for the idea. I mean, let's be honest, there's just so much English and also Turkish and Arabic leaking into the German language that it seems to be, wanted. It seems to be being encouraged by the Germans themselves. And there's no pride in the German language here. It's not fiercely guarded like it is in France or Italy or Spain. And yeah, I suppose there are a lot of historical reasons why that is, which is that's too big for the scope of this video. But I often get a handful of comments on my videos from people saying, why are you talking about Germany? There is no Germany. The country of Germany doesn't exist. What are you talking about? Seriously, yes, that is a thing. Maybe a topic for another video. But it's complicated. It is complicated. Now with the German government trying to reposition itself as more internationally minded, trying to really strengthen its stake as, the leader and powerhouse of Europe, a lot of the politicians are now speaking English in public. This is something which the Merkel government shied away from and was kind of reluctant to do. And so when it comes to the language, I just see zero resistance to have a conversation with any 20-year-old German, and half the words they use are English, kind of twisted into German grammar, but they seem to like it. They're very open. This is not like a sort of top-down invasion scenario. This is an opening up of the host culture, welcoming in foreign influences in terms of the language. And this is what I've always said. As a native English speaker, you have to be very aggressive in pursuing your learning. Like if you are not perseverant, Germans will just immediately switch to English if they hear your English accent. Again, I'm only talking about the big cities. Obviously, it's different in the countryside. But in the big cities, if you want to learn German, you have to be like really driven. Otherwise, people are just going to switch to English and you're not going to be able to practice. Okay, so that was a lot. Depending on who you are and what you value, you might find these developments that I've just discussed as something to be very excited about or a cause for serious concern. The reality is one thing, the way you react to it is another. Ich kann nur sagen, Deutschland ist nicht perfekt. Deutschland hat viele Probleme, und ich sage ganz bewusst Probleme und nicht Herausforderungen. Die Zukunft ist unklar, aber trotzdem mag ich Deutschland. Deutschland gefällt mir und Deutschland ist mein Zuhause. Okay, that's it. Just remember, we're trying to build bridges here. Do not believe everything you hear on the news. I highly encourage you to engage with other people from different backgrounds. The people that you meet, the people that you call your friends, will change the way that you view the world and the way that you view the immigration debate. If you see immigration as this faceless kind of blob or mass, like something over there, it's very easy to demonize the group. But once you actually get to know individual people personally, it changes the whole dynamic and you start to see these countries in a very different light. But the whole point of this video, the point I'm trying to make, is that it is getting easier and easier to not learn German. And as I said, people do not generally choose to make things harder for themselves. And so they will take the path of least resistance. And so if you offer a path where integration and learning the language is not an absolute necessity, they won't take it. So I thank you all for your comments. It really did give me pause to stop and think, which is one of the reasons why I really enjoy having this channel here. I hope to come back to this topic in the future with more ideas at some point. I hope it gave you some food for thought. That's it for now. Take care and bye-bye.